All right, this is Block 5, the Young Republic, Section 5, Why Was the South Different? And the South was different and is different. Anyone who's ever been down south knows it is a very different feel, very different place, very different culture from most of the rest of the United States, and that goes all the way back to colonial times. And we're going to be dealing pretty much between now, the Young Republic, and through the end of the Civil War and beyond, differences in the United States between North and South. So it is certainly worth having a little bit of a look and a little bit of a discussion as to why did the South develop differently, why was the South different from the rest of the country. Well, let's start with the most obvious thing. The South had slavery, and the North, for the most part, did not, or got rid of it. But slavery becomes the most important institution in the South. But it goes much deeper than that. The slaves, when we think of slavery in American history, we are thinking of the slave-owning elite of the South. The creation of a political, economic, and social elite in the South simply did not happen like anywhere, did not happen to that extent anywhere else in the country. There was always rich families in New England. There was rich families in New York, families that, had more money than God and built gorgeous estates. And those all existed. Let's not imagine that the North was some kind of egalitarian paradise. It certainly wasn't. But the elite in the South defined the South. There's a class of yeoman farmers, a large class of poor whites, and then a whole lot of slaves in the South. That class structure defines the society. There is no middle class in the South. And since a middle class is defined by trade and industry, no middle class means no trade and industry. It actually works the other way around. There's no trade and industry in the South, and therefore there is no middle class. And why is there no trade or industry? Because the elites are making all of their money producing cash crops. One cash crop in particular, cotton. And as long as the elite maintains their elite status by the production of cotton, there is seen to be no social need to create trade or industry, because the elite is making plenty of money just dealing in this cash crop. The yeomanry, the small independent farmers that kind of form the backbone of the Jeffersonian Party and then the Jacksonian Party, the Democrats, these small independent farmers are making a good enough life for themselves, supplying the great plantations with what they need. And the large mass of poor whites, well, they're kind of kept in check by the racial system and racial structure of the South that says, any white man is greater than any slave or any black man, no matter how poor, destitute, uneducated, ill, prepared, dirty, nasty he might be. So you have this class structure that is created by, and we saw back in colonial times how that class structure got started with the head rights system and the indentured servitude. The fact that the elite did not have to trade or did not have to manufacture to make money prevented the emergence of a middle class. It prevents the emergence of any large cities. That in the 1810s and 20s and 30s, American cities in the North are growing by leaps and bounds, fed by this commerce, fed by this industry. There is no industry in the South. There is no commerce in the South except selling cotton up north. And because of that, cities are not going to develop in the South in nearly the same way as they are going to develop in the North. The largest cities in the South, Birmingham, Richmond, and Charleston, and New Orleans, are not, and New Orleans is not a southern city. New Orleans is in a category all by itself, as it always is. Cities are built on middle-class trade and manufacturing, and since there was no trade and manufacturing in the South, and there was no trade and manufacturing in the South because of these elite planters growing their cash crops, no cities really developed in the South. And then the culture of the South was very, very different. That up in the North, like the things that were valued were the ability to make money, property, getting on in the world, education, what books have you read, how big is your library, how many acres do you own, how much do you trade. It's a material culture in the North. The North is concerned about getting ahead, as so many of us are. The North is concerned about making money, starting businesses, establishing farms, pushing the frontier, banking and commerce and industry and all the stuff that makes the economic money wheels go tick, tick, tick. And the South, somebody once said, and I think there's a lot of truth in this statement, that the South was really the last non-material culture in the Western world. That to a Southerner, the most important thing was not how many acres they owned or how much cotton they grew or how many slaves they, enslaved. The most important thing was honor. That a Southerner's honor was the most important thing that he or she owned. And any threats to that honor were to be met with deadly, violent force. That's why having duels between people over violations of honor remains in the South much longer than it remains in the North. That dueling, although illegal, is considered a socially acceptable way to settle disputes in the South through the Civil War and beyond, after the Civil War, that a man's honor was the coin in which he traded. Unlike the North, when a man's coin was the coin in which he traded. But in the South, honor was important, and Southerners found their honor to be the most important thing about them. And, in the run-up to the Civil War, Southerners, why? Well, there's a lot of reasons that go into that. The elites who run the South, elites often develop this culture of honor. The feeling of superiority amongst the poor whites compared to the blacks leads to this idea that they also have honor. It's a foundational part of Southern culture. It goes to explain why they were such difficult soldiers to deal with in the Civil War, why they were such good soldiers, why they produced so many great generals. The concept of honor is important in a military career. The South was also defined by a relative lack of education. Education in the North was considered important because it helped you get ahead. We all know the trope. Go to school so you can be successful in life. That's a Northern thing. That comes from the Puritans. That comes from the Protestant work ethic. All the way back to the Pilgrims and the Puritans of early Massachusetts. The elites down south kind of disdain education. Education is pointless. What is, education only leads you to, believe silly things that, only an educated person would believe. And there's some truth in that statement too. But Southerners knew, who they were, what was honorable, what was dishonorable, and any kind of philosophy or education, Southerners knew how to grow cotton, how to deal with their slaves, how to be honorable. And all that highfalutin education wasn't necessary for a man of honor. In fact, it was for a man of honor to be overly educated was a little dishonorable. That a gentleman knew a little bit about a lot of stuff, but was certainly did not consider education to be the most important of all virtues. A Jeffersonian belief in the limitedness of government also prevented most Southern states from establishing public education systems. By the 1820s and 30s in the North, most Americans in the North are going to free public schools for at least some months out of the year. This does not develop in the South until after the Civil War. That the elites, you can look at it cynically, you can say the elites kind of liked having the elite status and certainly did not want anyone below them to be greatly educated because then they could threaten their power. And the other way to look at it was the Southern way of life, which was an important thing to Southerners. They often talked about the Southern way of life. The Southern way of life did not require education like a Northern way of life did, where people are moving and establishing businesses and establishing farms and commerce and trade and industry, where you need an education. Growing crops on your own land in the South, you do not need the education that people up north need. So education lags behind also. So you add up all these things, this sense that the power of this elite, the fact of slavery, which turns, all white people in the South into kings, whether they were, dirt poor or actually one of the elites. They felt that way because they could look at all the slaves and say, ha, 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 at least not you. An emphasis on honor and not on material values or material things defined the South. Lack of education amongst most Southerners defined it. Military glory, military prowess, military ability defines the South. It's a different place than the North. And as the North advances and modernizes and industrializes and starts to get slums and factories and immigrant groups and people making money, making fortunes, losing fortunes, building railroads, the South looks at that, starts to look at that and say, look, that's just not us for a lot of historical reasons. And it was for those historical reasons that the South was different, traceable right back to colonial times.